This is Nick with logosbynick.com, and in today's tutorial I'll be demonstrating how you can create this graphic here depicting an iPhone with a swimming pool in it using Inkscape. So we'll go ahead and get started in Inkscape. I'm going to go ahead and open up the Inkscape window. By the way, if you'd like to know how you can make Inkscape appear dark and with these custom icons, a link to that information will be in the description of the video. So the first thing we want to do is set up our document so that we're all working on the same page here. So the first thing we'll do is go to File, Document Properties, and we want to set the display units to px, which is pixels. And for the border, we're going to uncheck the button that says Show Page Border, and then we can close out of that. And what we want to do now is go to View, make sure we have that set to Custom, and then we'll go to View, Zoom in at 1:1, and then we'll open up the Align and Distribute menu with this button over here. And we're going to want Last Selected chosen from that drop down. And then we'll open up the Edit Objects, Colors, Gradients, and Stroke menu with that button there. And the first thing we're going to do is draw a rectangle. So we'll come over here to the Squares and Rectangles tool and just click and drag to create a rectangle that's slightly longer than it is wide, something like that. Let's go over to the Select tool so we can change the width and height. And you notice here for the width I have 350 and for the height I have 465. That's a pretty good dimension to have there, 350 by 465. So if you want to go ahead and type that in manually, that would probably be good. So once we have our rectangle, we'll just convert that to a path by going to Path, Object to Path. And I'll come over here to where it says Opacity and drop this down about in half. Then I want to right click this rectangle and go to Duplicate. And I want to make that red. And I want to take this top arrow and scale that up a little bit, and take this one, scale that up as well. Let me turn off snapping for now. And take this right arrow and put this over to the right. And take this one, bring it to the left, just to create like a little bit of a border going around it. And then I want to come over here to where it says Lower Selection one step. Lower it one step beneath the black rectangle there. And I'll click and drag over both of those and make sure they're centered on the vertical and horizontal axis. And then click off it to deselect everything. And what I'm going to do now is grab the rectangle tool again and create another rectangle going over these two. Maybe something that's a little longer than it is wide, kind of like that. Sort of like what you'd see on an iPhone, something like that. And I'll just make that green. And I'll take this little circle node to the top right here and bring that down a little bit to give this rounded corners. Go ahead and convert that to a path by going to Path, Object to Path. And then we'll go back to the Select tool. And I'm going to drop this to the bottom with this button right here, Lower Selection to the bottom. And what I'll do now is I'll just click and drag over all three of those and make sure we have them centered on the vertical axis like that. And then we can click off to deselect everything. And then we'll want to take the green object and just make sure it's positioned so that there's more space on the bottom side than there was on the top side. Maybe not that much, maybe something like this, that's pretty good. And I'm going to put a little button right here for the home button. So to do that I'll grab the Circles and Ellipses tool, and I'll hold Control and Shift on the keyboard and click and drag to create a perfectly round circle like that. And I'll make that red. I'll go back to the Select tool and put this in here. I'll just hold Control and Shift and scale that down a little bit, right about there. Then I'll hold Shift and click on the green rectangle and just make sure it's centered on the vertical axis. And click off it to deselect everything. I'm actually just going to bring this down a little bit, and then I'll take these two and bring them down a little bit as well. Maybe about that much, that's pretty good. And I'm just going to bring this up a little bit as well. If you start moving these objects around like I'm doing here, just make sure you hold Control while you're doing it so it locks it onto the vertical axis and the horizontal axis. Otherwise, if you don't hold Control, it kind of just moves around freely, which we don't want. We want it locked onto the specific axis in the direction that we're moving it. So what I'll do now is put a little slit up here, just a little rectangle slit for the speaker, like that right there. So grab the Rectangles and Squares tool, click and drag to create another rectangle, something like that. Go back to the Select tool, hold Shift, click on the green rectangle and center it on the vertical axis. Click off it to deselect, and I'll just move that up a little bit. Again, holding Control while we do that to lock it onto the vertical axis. I'll go to Path, Object to Path, and I'll just move that up a little bit as well. And click off of it to deselect everything. So we have this shape of our phone set. So what we should do now is start to color this in a little bit. So I'll click and drag over all of this, bring the opacity all the way up, click off of it to deselect everything, and I'll click on the green part, and I'll make that a very light shade of gray, something like that. What is that? ECECEFF. And then for this side in here, well, if you notice, I made this sort of like this is a light blue going around the outside, and then like a standard shade of blue going on the inside. So to do that, I'll click on the red rectangle and I'll make that like a very light dull shade of blue, maybe something like this. Now maybe even a little lighter. Maybe something like that. Then I'll click on this black rectangle here and I'll make this maybe this shade over here, which is 00CCFF, like that. And then I'll click on that red circle, hold shift, click on this red rectangle, and I'll make these like a darker, slightly darker shade of gray than what the phone is. Click off it to deselect. Let me go back to this rectangle right here. I don't quite like that shade. I'm going to make this, I'm going to come up here to where it says fill, and under the HSL tab I'm going to take that S row and slide that to the right a little more to give that a little more color. We can click off of that to deselect everything. And what I'll do now is I'll click and drag over all of this, and I'll click on it again to get the rotation handles. And then I'm going to hold control and take this top arrow here in the center and slide this to the left 2 steps while holding control. So we'll go 1, 2 like that. And then I'm going to hold control and grab this bottom right corner arrow and rotate that counterclockwise a couple of steps, either 2 or 3. Let me see. 1, 2. Yeah, 2. That's pretty good like that. And leave that how that is for now. And if you notice here in the thumbnail, I have the background set as yellow, and the phone itself is not actually gray, it's actually white. So let's set up our document to reflect that. Let's go back to File, Document Properties, and we're going to look for background color. Click on that. And under the HSL tab, we want to just take the H row and bring this to a shade of yellow. Take the S row, bring that all the way to the right. Take the A row and bring that all the way to the right. And I'm actually going to have to go back. We'll do something like that. That's pretty good. If you want to use the exact values I'm using here, just hit 40, 255, 255, 255, and that should get you where I'm at here. Then we can go ahead and exit out of that, and then exit out of that. And we have our background set to that shade of yellow. So now we can take this gray phone right here and just make that white. Then we can take this gray object, hold shift, click on the other gray object, and just make them a little lighter to match that. And that's pretty good. We can click off that to deselect everything. So what I'm going to do now is create a little bit of depth for that phone here. If you notice, there's like a gray object going beneath it right there to suggest that it's like a 3D object. So to do that, I'll click on the white object, hit Control D on the keyboard to duplicate that, and then just hold Control and move this down here. And then I'm going to grab the dropper tool, which is over here, or you could press F7 on the keyboard, or I believe you could press D as well. That'll actually, no, not D, F7 to get the dropper. Or you can just click the icon and make that the same shade of gray that the button is here. Go back to the select tool, hold Control and move this up. Then lower that to the bottom with this button here, lower selection to the bottom. And I'm just going to hold Control and move that up a little more. And that right there is pretty good. What we have to do now is just connect the sides together. So let me just zoom in over this left corner right here by holding Control and rolling up the mouse wheel to zoom in. So I'm going to grab the Bezier pen, which is over here, or you can press B on the keyboard to get that. And I'm going to turn snapping back on. And I want to turn on this button here that says snap to, it's not coming up, there it is, snap to paths, that little green squiggly line. And snap the cursor onto this far left edge right here and click. Then hold Control and bring that line straight up until it snaps onto the white object, and then click. And then we can let go of Control and finish up the line going around the outside of the yellow area. Back to the starting point. And we go back to the Select tool, hold Shift, click on the gray object, and go to Path, Union. Then we can press 1 on the keyboard to zoom out to 100%. And you see we have that side set there. So we're going to do the same thing over here on this side. So let's go back to the Bezier pen. Or you can just press B on the keyboard if you'd like. Just hold Control, roll up the mouse wheel to zoom in. Snap the cursor onto this far right side and click. hold Control, bring the line straight up until it snaps to the white object, click, then let go of Control and bring it all the way around, back to the starting point. Go back to the Select tool, hold Shift, click on the gray object, and go to Path, Union. And press 1 on the keyboard to zoom back out to 100%. And now we can click off that to deselect everything. So what we'll do now is we're going to create the all of like the blue objects that you see inside of the phone here that create the illusion like it's a swimming pool with water inside of it. So to do that, let me get back into Inkscape. I'm going to zoom in over this top corner over here, holding Control, rolling up the mouse wheel. Go back to the Bezier pen. B is the keyboard shortcut. And over here in the snapping panel, I'm going to turn off the snap to paths, and I'm going to turn on snap to custom nodes. You'll see here I already have it turned on because I was using it previously. So go ahead and turn that on, and you should be able to snap the cursor onto this corner right here. And then click. And then just hold Control and move the cursor. Bring that line straight down about that much. Maybe about that much is pretty good. And then click. And then while still holding Control, bring the line out here so that it's running parallel with this blue edge here like that. And then click. And then snap the cursor onto this corner over here. And then back to the starting point. And what we want to do now is go back to the Select tool and click on this blue object here in the center and duplicate that by hitting Control D. And then hold Shift and click on that little box that we just drew and go to Path, Intersection. And then we want to make this the same shade of blue that this is. So we'll go to the dropper and just make that the same shade of blue. And come up here to the Fill tab, and under the HSL tab, I'm going to take the L row and slide that to the left a little bit to make that a little darker. And maybe I'll take this H row and slide that over a bit as well to make that more blue. And I want to get rid of that black outline by holding Shift and clicking the X. And let me zoom out a little bit. We're going to do the same thing going this way now. So let's go back to the Bezier pen. Snap to this corner and click. Then just snap to that corner and click. Hold Control and bring the line going parallel with the edge of the blue shape. Click. Over to this corner and then back to the starting point. And if you'd like to move the page around like I'm doing here, just press down on the mouse wheel and move the mouse, and that'll let you move the page around as well. You could also hold down the space bar and move the mouse. That'll also move the page. And again, we'll go back to the Select tool. Click on the blue object here in the center, duplicate that by hitting Control D. Then hold Shift and click on this line, that box that we just drew, and go to Path, Intersection. Whoops, I messed something up there. Path, Intersection. There we go. And I'm going to make this the same shade of blue this is here, so we'll go back to the dropper, make that the same shade of blue, but we'll make this a little lighter by taking the L row and sliding that to the right. We want this to be lighter than this shade of blue here in the center. And let's go ahead and get rid of that black outline by holding Shift and clicking the X. And let me go back over to this thumbnail just as a reference here. If you notice here, this shade of blue here, it's a little lighter. It's a little bit darker than the blue going around the outside of the edge of the pool. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're setting the shade here. So something like that's pretty good. Let me go back to the Select tool. Maybe I'll even click on this here, this little edge around the pool. I'll make that a little lighter as well. That's better. And we can just press 1 on the keyboard to zoom back out. Click off it to deselect everything. And the next step would be to create a little box in here to look like it's create the illusion of like light reflecting off of it. So to do that, I'll just click on this blue object here in the center and hit Control D to duplicate it. And I'll just make that lighter using the S row over here. It's the third row down. With Inkscape 92, sometimes it glitches and these letters disappear. So just it's the third row down in case yours is glitching as well. I'll just hold Control and move this, scale this down like that. Put this over here in the corner. That's pretty good. And click off of that to deselect everything. And the next step now would be to create a little ladder to put in there. So to do that, we're going to create a rectangle. So let's go to the Squares and Rectangles tool. And I'll just make this off to the side of the page here. I'll just click and drag on the canvas to create a little rectangle like that, something thin and long like that. And I'll take this, actually, you know what, let me make the corner sharp again. And then I'll take this one node here and just bring that all the way down so we get that little rounded, those little rounded edges there. And I want to give that a red outline by holding Shift and clicking on the color red. And then click on the X over here to turn off the fill color. And then let's come over to the Stroke Style tab. I'm going to make this a little thicker. We want to change this measure of units, this unit of measurement to pixels, px. And I want to make this a little thicker, so I'll try out maybe like a 6 or 7 point stroke. That's still not good. Maybe try 12. Or try like 10 or something, see how that looks. I'll grab the select tool and I'll just put this over here to get a sense of how big it is compared to the rest of the pool. And I'll just hold Control and scale it. Oops. Hold Control and scale it down a bit. That's pretty good like that. Let's say that's a pretty good size. For me, it's 10. It might be different for you. If you're using a screen with a different resolution, you may have to play around with this. Maybe for you, it'll look good at like 5 or 6 or maybe even 18. Who knows? So just play around with it, see until you get like a good thickness like I have here. This is going to be the ladder here. So to create this to be a ladder, let's zoom in on this by holding Control and rolling up the mouse wheel. And before we do anything else, let's just make sure we have Join over here set to rounded. And Cap, we have that set to rounded as well. And then we'll go to the Select tool, not the Select tool, the Bezier pen, which is B on the keyboard, and bring the cursor up here, right up towards the top on the inside of this red rectangle. Then click to create a new point, hold Control and bring the line straight out through here, and click again. And bring the line going around the outside of the shape here. And right to about here, towards the bottom left-hand side of the rectangle, hold Control and bring the line straight through there. And click, and then back to the starting point. So we end up with something like that. We can go to the Select tool, hold Shift, click on the red object, and go to Path, Cut Path. And that's going to cut it into 2 separate objects. And let me click off of the graphic to deselect everything. And then just take this piece here and move this out. And you'll see, you just press Delete on the keyboard. We're now left with just one little piece right here that's going to make up one of the sides of the ladder. So I'm going to put this right about here. I'm going to take this, I'm just going to shorten this a little bit. I'll go to the Edit Paths by Nodes tool, and I'll hold Control and just bring this node up a little bit. It's a little too long. And I'll go back to the Select tool, and I want to bring the opacity of this down a little bit. I want to turn Snap to Paths back on, the green squiggly line. Turn on Snap to Paths, and make sure you have Snap to Custom Nodes. That's still turned on as well. And I want to grab the object down by the bottom over here and snap it onto the edge of this light blue object. Snap that right there. And then I want to duplicate that by hitting Control D. And again, grab the object down by the bottom and snap it onto the edge right about here. Maybe like that. Or maybe, yeah, maybe right about here is good. That's going to make the second part of the ladder, like the second handrail there. And now we just got to put some steps or some rungs going through there. So to do that, we'll go back to the Bezier pen. Snap to this corner here and click. Hold Control and oh, you know what? Let's go back to the Select tool and let's do that over. Let's go back to the Bezier pen. Snap to this path here and then click. And then hold Control and bring this line so it runs parallel with that blue edge right there until it snaps onto this red line here. And then click. And then hit Enter. And we want to make this line the same thickness that these 2 red lines are. So let's go back to the Select tool, and you can click on the red object, and you can see here in the Stroke Style tab, I used a width of 10 pixels. So I'll just go back to this black line and make that 10 pixels as well. So 10, hit Enter, give it a rounded cap and a rounded join, bring the opacity down a bit. Go back to the, we're already on the Select tool. So I'm just going to duplicate that by hitting Control D, and I'll move that up a little bit. Holding Control while you click and drag to move that up, I'll move this down a little bit. I'll create one more step maybe, Control D, bring that up to about there. Bring that up a little bit. And then I'm going to hold Shift and click on all 3 of those lines. And click the button right here that says Make Vertical Gaps Between Objects Equal. And that's going to make sure they're all spaced out equally. Then we can hold Shift and click on the red object and then the other red object while still holding Shift, so we have everything selected. And go to Path, Stroke to Path, and then Path, Union. And I want to take the steps. Let me turn off the Snap to Path. I want to take the bottom of this right side here and just bring this like about right about through here like this, halfway through this light blue segment like that, because that's where the ladder would really be sticking out of. So that's pretty good like that. I'll bring the opacity all the way up, and I'll make this a shade of gray, maybe something a little darker, maybe 40% gray. That looks pretty good. And if you go back to the thumbnail, you notice part of the ladder turns blue because it's under the water. To do that, I'll just duplicate the ladder by hitting Control D. And there's a duplicate copy. Then I'll click on the light blue here, and then I'll hold this light blue here in the center, then hold Shift and click on this light blue object right here as well, and duplicate them both by hitting Control D, and then go to Path, Difference, and then hold Shift and click on the ladder and go to Path, Intersection, and then we can go to the dropper and make this the same shade that this is right here. And now we can press 1 on the keyboard to zoom back out to 100%. And there we have our ladder. So let's go back to the Select tool. Next, we're going to create the little floating rafts here. To do that, if I can get my window to pop back up, there it is. We'll go to the Circles and Ellipses tool, and then just hold Control and Shift and click and drag to create a circle like that, a perfectly round circle. We'll get rid of the red outline by holding Shift and clicking the X. Go back to the Select tool, bring the opacity of this down a little bit, and I'll duplicate that by hitting Control D, and I'll just make this red, and I'll hold Control and Shift and scale it down, maybe about that much. That's pretty good. Then I'll take this blue circle, I'll duplicate that by hitting Control D, and I'll hold Control and move this down to about here, and lower that to the bottom. And this button up here, this is lower selection to the bottom. I'm going to make that green, and then I'll take this red object right here, I'll duplicate that again by hitting Control D, and I'll make that green, and then I'll duplicate it again by hitting Control D, and I'll make that red, and then hold Control and just click and drag this down about that far. And then we could hold Shift. Oops. We could hold Shift and click on the green circle beneath it and go to Path, Difference. And now we can click and drag over all of that so we have it all selected, and take this bottom arrow and just bring that up like that. And I'm going to zoom in over this by holding Control and rolling up the mouse wheel. Click off it to deselect. I'm going to take this this red circle right here and then hold Shift and click on the blue circle and go to Path, Difference. And what I want to do now is I want to take this blue circle with it still selected. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate that, and I'll go to Path, Break Apart, Path Break Apart, and then Path Union. And I'll just hold Control. I'm going to click on it again to get back to the scaling handles. I'm just going to hold Control and Shift and scale that down a little bit, maybe about that much, and then hold Shift and click on the green object and go to Path, Difference. And now we just have to connect the sides together. So to do that, I'll go back to the Bezier pen. We want to turn Snap to Paths back on. Snap to the left edge right here, and click, hold Control straight up until it snaps to the left edge of the blue object, and then click, still holding Control straight across, snap it onto there, snap it down to here, holding Control the whole time, and then back to the starting point, which you'll have to let go of Control, back to the starting point. Go back to the Select tool, hold Shift, click on the green object down here, and go to Path, Union. And then I'll go to the Edit Paths by Nodes tool, and I'm just going to take this line and click and drag that out of the way, like that. And we go back to the Select tool. Now let's click and drag over all of it and bring the opacity all the way up. And if you notice, I made one of them like a pinkish red, and I made this one blue. So let's make this one, let's pick like a dull shade of pink for this one. Maybe something like that. We can go to the Fill tab and just adjust it as you see fit. Something like that's pretty good. Then I'll click off it to deselect, and I'll click just this piece here in the middle, and then hold Shift and click this piece here at the bottom. And I'll take the L row and slide that to the left a little bit. And now we're just going to put like a little line going around the inside of it to give it like the something that suggests there's like light reflecting off of it. So to do that, I'll click on this light pink circle up here, and I'll duplicate that by hitting Control D. And I'll go to Path, Break Apart, Path, union, and then let me find the color white down here, all the way to the left. I'm going to hold shift and click on the color white to give it a white outline, and then click on the X all the way to the left over here to turn off the fill. And I'll just hold control and shift and scale it down a little bit, maybe about that much. That's pretty good. And what I'll do now is let's go to the Edit Paths by Nodes tool, and I want to click and drag over all 4 of those nodes, and I want to click the button that says Add New Insert New Nodes into Selected Segments, because we're going to need extra nodes in there for what we do next. And we'll go to the Bezier pen, which is over here, and just well, you know what? Let's use the Squares and Rectangles tool, and we'll just create a rectangle going over the bottom of this here, going about halfway through that white circle we just created. And let me just give that sharp corners, and I'll make this green, and I'll get rid of the white outline by holding shift and clicking the X. And I'll bring the opacity down a little bit. I'll go back to the select tool, and I'll hold shift, click on the white ring, and go to path, cut path. Then click off it to deselect everything. Take this top part and just get rid of it. And now we have this white ring right here. We can convert that to a path by going to path, stroke to path. And let me hold control and roll down the mouse wheel a little bit to zoom out. I'll click and drag over those. I'm going to scale that down by holding control and shift and clicking and dragging that arrow. And let me turn off snap to paths. Let's turn that off temporarily. And put this over here in the pool. Actually, you know what? I'm going to have to raise this to the top. With all of it selected, click the button that says Raise Selected Objects to the top. Bring this over here. And I'm just going to make that a little smaller. That's pretty good. I'll duplicate that by hitting Control D and bring this over here. Click off it to deselect. And I'll take this light pink object here, and I'm just going to make that a shade of blue. Something that stands out from the pool water, something like that. And then I'm just going to zoom in on this by holding control and rolling up the mouse wheel. Click on that dark pink object, hold shift, click on the other pink object, and I'll make this an even darker shade of blue, maybe something like that. And we could take this white line and make that the same shade that this is by going to the dropper tool, clicking on that. And I'll just take the L row and slide that to the left to make that a little lighter. And I'll do the same thing over here. I'll grab the select tool, click on the white line, then grab the dropper, make that the same shade of pink, and then just take that L and slide that to the right a little bit. And go back to the select tool, press 1 on the keyboard to zoom back out to 100%. And the final step would be to create this little beach ball here. So to do that, get this to pop back up. There we go. To create a beach ball, I'm going to go to Extensions, Render, and go down to Wireframe Sphere. And the parameters that we want in here, set it up so that you have it mirroring what I have on my screen. For lines of latitude, we want 8. For lines of longitude, we want 10. Then for tilt, 55. For rotation, 4. Radius, 100. And we want to turn on this box that says hide lines behind the sphere. We want that checked. Then we can click on the box that says live preview, and it'll show you what it looks like. That's what we want right there. So once we've done that, go ahead and click apply, and then we can close out of that, and we now have our wireframe sphere to work with and turn it into a beach ball. So I'm going to zoom in on that, and I'm going to ungroup it by going to up here where it says ungroup selected objects. I'll click on that a few times actually to ungroup everything, and click off it to deselect everything. And what we want to do now is take these lines of latitude running horizontally and just delete them. Just press delete on the keyboard, press delete, get rid of this one as well, press delete, and get rid of that one. Except for this one. We're going to leave this one right where it is. And now we can click and drag over all of that and go to path, stroke to path, and then click off that to deselect everything. So what we want to do now is, where these lines of longitude are, we want to get rid of the segment that's inside of this circle up top here. So to do that, I'll click on this circle up here, and I'll hit Control D to duplicate that, and I'll go to Path, Break Apart, and Path, Union, and I'll bring the opacity of that down a little bit. And I'm just going to make this a different color to differentiate it from the rest of the object. I'll make that like blue or something. That's pretty good. And I'll duplicate that by hitting Control D, and then hold shift and click on one of those lines and go to Path, Difference. And we want to do that to the rest of the lines. So click on the blue object, Control D, hold Shift, click one of the lines, path difference. Do it again, click the blue object, Control D, hold Shift, click on the next line, path difference. And I'm just going to go and do that to each one of these. Path difference. Oops, I clicked the wrong thing. Path difference. And then finally, with the last one, we don't have to duplicate it. We can just hold Shift and click on the line and go to path difference. And now what we can do is click and drag over all of that and go to path union, and then bring the opacity down about in half, and then go to path break apart, and then click off of it to deselect everything. So what we're going to do now is take this circle here in the middle and just delete that. Then we'll take this segment over here and delete that. And then we want to go and delete every other segment that we just, from the one we just deleted. So I'll skip this one, then come over here, delete that one, skip this one, and then delete that one, delete that one, delete that one. Then I'll hold Shift and click on each of those black segments right there and unify them all together by going to Path, Union, bring the opacity all the way up. I'll make them like a shade of red, maybe something like that. Then I'll click on the black circle, bring the opacity all the way up, make that white. And I'll even hold Control and Shift to scale it down a little bit, so it's the same width as the red objects. And I'll press 1 on the keyboard to zoom it back out to 100% and click and drag over that. And we'll group it together with this button up here, Group Selected Objects. And we'll just put it in the pool. I'll hold Control and Shift to scale it down, something like that. And I think that should cover everything. We've finished up our graphic of an iPhone with a pool inside of it. So that's how you could do that with Inkscape. If you have any questions, let me know. And as always, thanks for watching.